You will smile, her mother hissed through her own fixed smile, and you will say the words, and you will be a viscountess by noon, and you will thank me for it on your knees one day. Ursula Main stood at the foot of the altar in a gown of cold white satin, and could not feel her own hands. The candles of the great church burned in their hundreds, throwing gold light up the grey stone columns, and the congregation rustled in their pews like a field of dry corn, and at the altar rail waited the man she was to marry, Garrow, 3 times her age, with eyes like wet slate, and a thin mouth that had never once smiled at her with anything but ownership. He had bought her. There was no kinder word for it. Her father's debts had been the price, and she herself the coin, and the bargain had been struck across her head by men who had never asked her a single question, and now there was nothing left but to walk the long aisle and hand herself over. From his place in the 3rd pew, the Duke of Yarbrook watched her come, and his heart broke quietly inside the cage of his perfect composure. Theodore, Duke of Yarbrook, had loved Ursula Main for 2 years and had never once told her so. He had loved her at country dances where he had been too proud and too careful to speak. He had loved her across drawing rooms and dinner tables. He had loved the quick, dark intelligence of her, the courage under the quietness, the way she had of looking at the world as though she saw straight through its pretenses and forgave them anyway. He had told himself there was time. He had told himself a man should be certain. And while he was being careful and certain, her father had gambled the estate to ruin, and Lord Garrow had moved in like a creditor seizing goods, and the time the Duke had counted on had run out between one season and the next. He had come to the wedding because he could not stay away, because some desperate, unreasoning part of him had needed to see her face one last time before the doors of that loveless house closed upon her forever. He had told himself he would witness it like a gentleman and grieve in private, like a gentleman, and never, ever shame her with the weight of a love she had not asked for. He watched her reach the altar. He watched her stand beside the slate-eyed man. He watched the colour drain from her face until it was whiter than her satin gown. The clergyman began. His voice rolled out over the congregation, grave and unhurried, the old words that bound 2 souls for life. Ursula stared straight ahead at the gold cross above the altar, and she did not look at the man beside her, and her gloved hands were clasped so tightly before her that the Duke could see, even from where he sat, the tremor running through them. If any man can show just cause, the clergyman intoned, why these 2 may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. The silence that followed was the longest of the Duke of Yarbrook's life. He felt the word rise in his throat, the word that would shatter everything, the word a gentleman did not speak. His own pride pressed it down. It is not your place. She has not asked you. You will only shame her. Hold your peace. He held his peace. And it was in that terrible held silence that Ursula Main swayed. He saw it begin before anyone else did, saw the white go grey at the edges of her, saw her eyes flutter, saw the small helpless tilt of a body that has reached the very end of what it can bear. The dread she had carried up the aisle, the years of it, the airless weight of a future she could not survive, rose up all at once and took her, and her knees gave way, and she fell. She fell, and Lord Garrow did not move. The slate-eyed man stood and stared at his collapsing bride with cold annoyance, as a man might watch a chair tip over. The Duke of Yarbrook was out of the 3rd pew before the thought had finished forming. He did not remember crossing the distance. He knew only that one moment he was sitting in the agony of his own restraint, and the next he was there, at the altar, on one knee on the cold stone, and Ursula Main was falling into his arms instead of onto the flags. He caught her against his chest, her white satin spilling over his dark coat, her dark head lolling against his shoulder, her face, even senseless, even grey, turned toward him as though some part of her had known whose arms would be there. The church erupted. There were cries, the scrape of pews, her mother's voice rising shrill above the clamour. Lord Garrow turned, and his slate eyes narrowed, and he said something cold and clipped about the bride being unwell and a chair being fetched, and the ceremony resuming directly. The Duke of Yarbrook rose to his feet with Ursula in his arms, and he looked at Lord Garrow, and every year of careful restraint fell away from him like a cloak dropped to the floor. "There will be no resuming," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the farthest pew, the way a man's voice does when at last he means every word of it with the whole of his soul. "This lady is not unwell," the Duke said. "This lady is afraid. She has fainted at the foot of a marriage she dreads, before God and all of you, and not one of you moved to catch her, not the man who claims her, not the mother who sold her. I will tell you what I see. I see a woman handed across the head of her own life by men who never once asked her what she wished, and I find that I cannot hold my peace after all." "Yarbrook," her mother gasped, "you forget yourself. This is a betrothed bride." "She is no man's bride," the Duke said, "until she has said yes of her own free will, and I have watched her face since she entered this church, and I have not seen a yes in it. I have seen dread. I have seen a brave woman trying to die quietly rather than make a scene. And I will not stand by and let it be done." He turned his gaze on Lord Garrow, and it was the gaze of a man no debt could buy and no rank could cow. "You will not have her. Whatever was bargained, whatever was owed, I will settle it myself, every penny, this very week, and gladly, to be quit of the sight of you. But you will not have her." And before the slate-eyed man could summon a single word, before the mother could shriek again, before the congregation could do more than gasp, the Duke of Yarbrook turned and carried Ursula Main back down the long aisle, out through the great doors, and into the clean, cold daylight beyond. She came to herself in the church porch, in the open air, cradled against a chest that was not Lord Garrow's. The first thing she saw was a face she knew, the Duke of Yarbrook, who had stood at the edges of 2 years of her life and never spoken, looking down at her now with an expression so naked, so full of fear and tenderness and a love he had hidden so long, that she forgot for a moment to breathe. "You caught me," she whispered. "I will always catch you," he said. "I am only sorry it took me until you fell to find the courage. I should have spoken 2 years ago. I should have spoken the moment I knew. I let pride and caution rob us both, and I have hated myself for it every day since they announced the match." His arms tightened around her. "I am done being careful, Ursula. I love you. I have loved you since a country dance 2 summers gone, when you laughed at something foolish and looked across the room and caught me watching, and I was too great a coward to cross the floor. I am not a coward now. I would carry you out of 100 churches. Only tell me I am not too late." The doors behind them burst open. Her mother came first, furious, with Lord Garrow grim behind her, and the scandalized congregation spilling out into the churchyard to watch the ruin of the morning. There would be talk. There would be talk for a generation. A bride carried from the altar in the arms of a duke. It would be told and retold until it passed into legend. Ursula Main looked up into the face of the man who had caught her, and she found that she did not care for the talk at all. "You are not too late," she said. Her mother reached them, white with rage, and began to speak of disgrace and broken contracts, and the shame brought upon the family name. The Duke of Yarbrook let her finish. Then he answered, still holding Ursula in his arms, and there was iron beneath the courtesy. "Madam," he said, "you speak of shame. There is shame here, but it is not your daughter's. The shame belongs to a mother who would sell her child to settle a husband's debts of cards, and to a man old enough to be that child's grandfather who would buy her and call it marriage. Your daughter has shamed no one. She has merely declined at the very last and at great cost to herself to be sold. I find that the bravest thing I have witnessed in my life." He looked at Lord Garrow over her mother's shoulder. "My solicitor will call upon you tomorrow regarding the debt. You will be paid in full, and you will trouble this family no further. That is the only transaction that will take place between us." And then, because there was nothing more worth saying to either of them. The Duke of Yarbrook carried Ursula Main to his waiting carriage and lifted her gently inside, away from the cold church and the colder bargain, into the daylight and the rest of her life. He did not take her to his own house. He was too careful of her name even now, even in the wreck of the morning, to do anything that might give the gossips fresh meat. He took her to his widowed sister's home, where she would be safe and chaperoned and warm, and he settled the matter of the debt within the week, exactly as he had promised, paying Lord Garrow every penny her father owed, so that no man on earth could say the Duke of Yarbrook had stolen a bride to cheat a creditor. He had not stolen her. He had freed her, and then he had courted her, properly, openly, in the daylight, the way he should have done 2 years before. He courted her through the spring. He came to his sister's house and sat with Ursula in the garden and told her, at last, all the things 2 years of caution had dammed up in him. He learned the sound of her real laugh, the laugh that had no fear under it. He watched the grey leave her face for good and the colour come back, watched her unfold week by week like a thing that had been kept too long in the dark and was learning the sun again. And when at last he asked her on one knee in his sister's garden, with no congregation and no contract and no debt between them, only the asking, she did not faint, and she did not dread, and she did not look away. "Yes," said Ursula Main, and she was smiling, and the smile reached all the way to her eyes. "Yes, Theodore, of my own free will, with no one selling me and no one buying, yes." They were married that summer in the same grey church, beneath the same gold cross, before the same candles, but everything else was different. This time the bride walked the long aisle with her head high and her hands steady, and this time she looked at the man who waited for her at the altar, and this time, when the clergyman asked if any could show just cause, the silence that followed was a happy one, full of nothing but the soft gold light. And when he asked her if she would take this man, she answered in a clear, glad voice that carried to the farthest pew. The Duke of Yarbrook had caught her once when she fell. He spent the rest of his life making certain she never had cause to fall again, and Ursula, who had once been carried senseless from a marriage she dreaded, woke every morning of all the warm years that followed to the safe and certain knowledge that she had been chosen freely and forever by the one man in the world who had loved her enough to set her free before he ever asked her to be his.